Welcome back. The Biden administration is launching a new initiative to address homelessness in rural communities. The Department of Housing and Urban Development announced today that it was awarding more than $300 million in grants to more than 40 communities nationwide. All of it is part of the administration's effort to reduce all homelessness in this country by 25% by the year 2025. Right now, there are about 600,000 people that are homeless in a single night, according to a recent report. And the likelihood is that we are undercounting, not overcounting. Because the goal is it's really difficult to keep track of this. But how challenging is this goal? The National Park Service says it plans to clear a homeless camp in McPherson Square. This is just 2 blocks from the White House, less than 2 weeks from now. It is the largest encampment in the district. I'm joined now by the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, also a former member of Congress, Marcia Fudge. Secretary Fudge, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I want to talk about why you're in what you're unveiling today, and that is a new initiative to try to address homelessness in rural communities. But obviously, this is an issue that is hitting every community of every size. Here in the nation's capital, they're about to clear McPherson Square of a homeless tent encampment. You're talking about rural communities. Mid-sized cities have these tent cities. Is it fair to call this an epidemic?
There's no question but that it's an epidemic. There is a crisis in this country. Anytime, Chuck, that you can say that 500,000 plus people sleep on our streets on any given night, that more than 200,000 of them are unsheltered, it is a crisis. It is an epidemic, and we are in Chicago today not only to give the resources that we know need to be targeted to those populations, but to sound the alarm as well.
And I guess that's the question. This is a grant that's targeting rural communities, but as we're discussing, every community is dealing with this. Do you have an example of a best practice these days where, boy, this community is figuring this out? Maybe it's the mini houses, maybe it's creating area. There are some people that would prefer to live in a tent and maybe designating areas. Is there a model out there?
I don't think that there's any one size fits all. What we know is that, yes, we have communities that are building tiny houses. We have communities that are building container homes. We have communities that are buying motels and hotels and putting unsheltered people in them. The biggest issue, though, and the reason that we're giving the $60 million to deal with unsheltered as well as rural, is so that we can do the kind of outreach. Many people don't have any idea that there is help. And so part of what we're doing is making sure that people can know that there is help, to do the kind of outreach we need to do, and then to quickly move people into sheltered housing. We try not to, of course, do congregate in shelters, but we do have resources where we know that there are people who have buildings that we can house people in. We know that there are places that, because of the COVID pandemic, are empty that we can use. There are many resources. People just don't know that they're there. But everybody has to do it the way that fits their community best.
Well, I was just going to say, do you believe that this homelessness crisis is HUD's responsibility or ultimately the responsibility of cities, and you're a partner to assist?
Well, I would say that both the president and vice president have made it clear to me that it is an issue that is a priority for them. It is all of our problem, Chuck. Anytime, I'm in Chicago today. Yesterday when I arrived here, it was 11 degrees. Can you imagine what it means for people to be sleeping under bridges? There is no place in this country, there is no place where people should be allowed to sleep on the streets. That means we have failed ourselves, because we assume that people who are on the streets are all mentally ill or they're on drugs. It is just not the truth. So my job is partially to humanize the face of homelessness, to say that there are single senior citizens who are on the street because they can't afford rent, that there are families with children, there are young people that are aging out of foster care. There are many reasons people on the street. And as a nation, we need to do better. So yes, is it a local problem? Yes, but when you start talking about 500,000 people, it is a national problem as well.
One of the things you hear when you talk to mayors about this issue is that there is a portion of this population that doesn't want to go into shelters or doesn't want to go into the system because the system didn't do, maybe they think the system is the reason why they're out there, right? So there's a little bit fear of this. How do you convince people to take advantage of these resources?
Well, I do talk to mayors every day. As you know, HUD not only does things like address homelessness, but we are the voice of cities in the federal government. That is what we do. But what I think people don't like is they don't have safety in what they call the system. This morning, we were talking with persons who had been formerly homeless, and what they all said to a person is the safety of a place that is mine, where I don't have to worry about sleeping in a shelter where I may be attacked, or where I may have to sleep on the floor, or where I don't know where I'm going to get my next meal. But the stability that comes from housing has changed their outlook. And so I think once we explain to people what we can do, and then get them stably housed and start to provide the services that they may need, then they change their tune. And I would say to you, Chuck, most people do not want to live on the street. People use that as an excuse. Yes, there are some, but by far, the majority of people want to live in a safe, stable home.
If there is one magic wand you could go to Congress, you know, it's always interesting to me. You were in the legislative branch a long time. Here you are now in the other branch, and you see how you are using the money that gets appropriated by Congress. If you went back to Congress now, what's a more effective way or effective bill you'd be introducing to make your job now as HUD Secretary easier?
Well, the first thing, obviously, I'd do is ask for resources for more low-income and moderate-income housing and more public housing. You know, some years back, Congress, in its own wisdom, decided that we could not build public housing. We could only replace public housing. There are many more people in need today than there were then. So the first thing I do is ask for resources. But the other thing I would say to them, Chuck, is that as elected officials, as people in the administration, as people in government, we only have one job, and that is to take care of the people we serve. And we are not doing our job when we are allowing hundreds of thousands of people to sleep on our streets.
Well, I tell you that what you just said there at the end about the issue of public housing and this idea that we don't build new public housing, it's a conversation that I hope we can get started with a lot more people. Secretary Marcia Fudge, really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us what you are doing.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.